Welcome back to the Xan Shoob podcast, where we discuss all things college football. After a long hiatus, the wait is finally over. We are back at it today with some SEC win totals. Since the season is only a few months away, we figured we'd talk about the new look of the SEC and how we feel about the lines that Caesars is giving us. Shoob, would you like to kick us off and explain how we're going to do this whole system?
Sure. So for these win totals, me and Xan are each going to select over or under for each team for their seasonal win total. You'll see there the line right here. Xan will be the X column. I will be the S column. And we're going to alternate back and forth and just pick over or under for how we believe each team will finish in regards to their win total. And we're going to start with the Western Division, move over to the East. And at the very end, we're going to give our quote unquote favorite bets, favorite plays, however you want to say it, maybe 1 to 2 of our favorites that we would actually wager our own money on, or we have already wagered our own money on. So Xan, without further ado, Alabama sitting at 11.0, a whole number. What do you got?
It's hard to go against Alabama, given all the talent they have and some of the returning talent they have. They are just a reloading type of program. And when you have returning talent for them, that just makes it even more of a just wow. Alabama is Alabama. I have Alabama on a plus side. I have them exceeding 11 wins and at the very minimal getting 11 wins. So I think they're a rather safe bet because even if they do lose a game, I can't see them losing 2 games. So regardless, I think if you were to place a bet, you'd get your money back. So one, we have to look at Bryce Young. Bryce Young is returning, of course. Bryce Young is a stud. He's going to be number 1 or 2 pick in the draft, given how you look at CJ Stroud. You have Will Anderson returning, who's just a true sophomore, and he was arguably already the best pass rusher in the game, and he is absolutely insane. The Alabama Crimson Tide also have an elite offensive line, many of which are projected in the first 3 rounds of this upcoming draft in early retrospect. Let's not forget about the key transfers here. We have Jahmyr Gibbs, 5-star from Georgia Tech, or basically a 5-star transfer. Dude is an absolute stud. He's going to, absolutely go off in the Alabama system. And then you have Elias Ricks, the 5-star stud corner from LSU. So they not only added talent, they maintained a lot of the talent that they had from last year. So it's really hard to see them getting any worse. And Shoob, when you look at the defensive side of the ball, they already have a ton of juniors and seniors that are projected to be starting in those positions. So they have a lot of experience coming back on that side of the ball. So it's really hard to bet against Alabama.
Absolutely. And for all the same reasons that you just said, I am also going to go with over. It's what I like to call push insurance when you have a team win total that's at a even whole number, or a whole number, I should say, 11.0 like Alabama. I agree with you. I could not see this team losing any more than 1 game. Losing 1 game is the floor. So in my opinion, you either win money or you get your money back. If you go with the over here, Alabama is going to be a very good team. And I think they're should be the favorite for the national championship. So now moving over to Texas A&M. This one was a little bit tougher. This is definitely one of the more interesting teams, especially with all the offseason hoopla that's been going on with them. But I kind of struggle with this one, but I'm going to take the over with Texas A&M. And I think that this over will go as far as their passing offense takes it. Of course, there's a little bit of a question mark at quarterback. We don't know if the quarterback there will be Max Johnson, who's the most proven of the 3, Haynes King, who we saw a little bit of last year before he got hurt, or Connor Weigman, a true freshman. But either way, whichever quarterback ends up fitting that role, I think that if they just get average to above average QB play, whoever that is, I think A&M can hit this total. They had a top 10 defense last year. They do lose their defensive coordinator, Mike Elko, to Duke. Jimbo went on and hired defensive coordinator DJ Durkin from Ole Miss. So I think that the upside at QB potentially outweighs the floor. I think the floor for this team is 7 to 8 wins. It's a very good roster. And like I said, if they just get decent QB play, they'll hit this over.
Absolutely. And just reiterating everything you said, Shoob, I agree 100%. I am on the over with Texas A&M. When you look at their roster, they have an absolutely elite defense. Very hard to contend with them in that respect. They also had the number 1 class as of last year. Now, many of those players probably won't play, but it's hard to believe that none of those players are going to make any impact whatsoever, even in the early game. We also see that Devin Achane is a very sneaky under the radar running back for them. Very fast, very shifty, elite talent. Will probably go in the second or third round. Absolutely great running back. So he
He's
can make
very
up for
good.
some of the lack. Exactly. He can make up for some of the lack of passing. But like you said, Shub, I absolutely 100% agree. It is entirely up to their passing attack. If we have an offense like they did last year, very lackadaisical, they are going to struggle. But even with that, their roster is just so good from top to bottom. It is really hard to see A&M struggling too badly, even with a very average offense. Like last year, they still had a very successful year given how poor their offense was last year. 8 wins for how bad their offense was actually pretty spectacular in my opinion. So, like you said, if they even get decent QB play, they're going to be in a good run. And I have them at the over. I like them for 9 to 10 wins.
So how about Ole Miss moving on? You're up first. 7.5 is the line here for the Rebels.
Ole Miss was a tough one. So when I was thinking about Ole Miss, I was thinking about their key transfers. So we look at Jackson Dart, who's no scrub from USC. That is a key transfer, a Lane Kiffin guy for sure. He is definitely going to have a good career at Ole Miss. I do believe in him. We also have Zach Evans from TCU. He's probably going to being the bell cow over there. Zach Evans wasn't really well renowned for like his accomplishments at TCU, but he did have a good yards per carry average. He's certainly still a very good running back despite all of the things that have been going on with him from all the transferring and whatever happens with him. There's just been a lot of hoopla about him. But then we also have Michael Trigg from USC, their top tight end, who also transferred over there. So they do have a lot of offensive guys coming in, Shub. But when I kind of look at this team holistically, they have a respectable defense. They don't have an elite defense. There's big question marks at the wide receiver position. There's not a single guy on that roster who has over 500 yards in receiving in a given season as of right now. And so there's a lot of youth and there's a lot of inexperience there. Not to mention you have new guys like Jackson Dart, Zach Evans, all these new guys who are coming in and learning a new system and trying to get ready for fall. So it's very hard to say that Ole Miss is going to surpass that 7.5 line. I actually have them underneath. I think they're a 7-win team. But ultimately, I think Ole Miss is still a good team, and they can certainly pass that. But I think given all the youth and inexperience at wide receiver and the fact that they have an average but not elite defense, I think is going to play a major role in this, considering that the SEC is also week to week, for the most part, very competitive. I do like them for wins against Troy, Central Arkansas, Georgia Tech, Tulsa, Vandy, Mississippi State. But then we have, I think they can win Kentucky or Auburn, but those are toss-ups. So for me, I think it under is definitely what I would go with that. But if I was a betting man, which I am, but this is not one that I would place a bet on comfortably.
I agree. I'm also going to go with the under here. I was a little surprised that it was this high at 7.5. And I think the question here, when you're looking at their win total, is how far will Jackson Dart match the production of Matt Corral? If you look at Jackson Dart's numbers at USC, he didn't really have the greatest of numbers statistically, and a lot of that had to do with the system there and everything going on at USC. But I just don't really see Jackson Dart matching exactly what Corral could do last season. Of course, he's going to put up a lot of good numbers. Another thing, too, that's a little bit of a red flag for me is that Ole Miss lost their offensive coordinator, Jeff Levy, and he went off to Oklahoma, and the replacement is Charlie Weiss Jr. from USF. And USF had a bit of a mediocre offense last year, so it's a little bit of a question mark for me offensively. And the first half of the schedule is pretty easy. In fact, I could see Ole Miss racking up a bunch of wins in the first half, but once they hit the second half of that schedule, it is brutal. And I think they're going to start racking up some L's. So I like the under as well. Now moving on to Arkansas. Arkansas is at an even 7. And this one pained me a bit, but I had to go with the under here for Arkansas. And there's some things that I do like about this team, but also some things I don't like. What I do like is that they have continuity coordinator with offensive coordinator Kendall Briles and Barry Odom at defensive coordinator coming back. So that's certainly a good thing. But the biggest problem for me with this Arkansas team is that their offense almost completely relies on KJ Jefferson's passing ability and running ability. I mean, he's their whole team. He's an absolute stud. But the thing is, if KJ Jefferson gets injured at any point during the year, I think this team is screwed. And that's a little bit of my reasoning for why I have the under baked in here, is because of the risk of KJ Jefferson getting hurt. If that happens, this under is going to hit easily. And also, if you look at the numbers, Treylon Burks last year, he went off to the draft, but he accounted for a 1/3 of the total receptions for Arkansas last year. So now that Treylon Burks is gone, of course they brought in Jaden Hazelwood, a nice transfer, and they do have other good receivers. But without Burks' production, it's like, all right, how much of that was all him versus not? And the non-con is pretty tough. Their non-conference, they got to play Cincinnati at home. They go on the road to BYU, and then they're going to play a scrappy Liberty team as well. So I just feel like this schedule is just brutal. And for those reasons, I'm going to take the under. I'm not really confident about it though, but that's why I'm going underneath here.
Those are all very, very good considerations, Shoob, especially the injury for KJ Jefferson. Let's not forget just how good he was. I mean, you were right about him being the whole team, him being a dual threat, 21 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 2,676 passing yards, in addition to his rushing yards. But we do see a good young running back that they have in Raheem Sanders, who shows a lot of promise. He is a young guy. He only, routinely worked in last year, but in the routine reps or minimalized reps that he got, he performed pretty well. So he's a guy to watch on who might be able to take some of the pressure off of KJ Jefferson. You also mentioned Jaden Haselwood transferring in, who had a little bit of a letdown career to this date at Oklahoma, given that he was a 5-star. But he is definitely in the market to have his stock rise and perform at a high level. So I think this will be a good situation for him. Let's take a look at Arkansas's defense. They do have a very respectable defense, pretty solid defense. Another thing that I consider when we were dealing with Arkansas here, they're very stout actually on the defensive side. They don't get a lot of love for that. Not to mention, I am a big buyer into the Sam Pittman coaching philosophy here, and he has done a fantastic job rejuvenating that program from bringing them up from the ashes. This program is an absolute phoenix coming from the ashes. When we think 5 years ago, you wouldn't think of Arkansas being a team that we'd be talking about for 7-8 wins. We'd be talking about them more in the Vanderbilt kind of area, but they're doing a fantastic job. And then you did mention the non-conference. I actually do agree with you. They do have a very tough non-conference schedule. I think they can beat Cincinnati. There's some question marks at Cincinnati. New quarterback. They lost so much talent to the NFL. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of team Cincinnati will be moving forward, given that they have lost so many people. I think Arkansas can beat Cincinnati, although that will be a very good game to watch. And then I do think that they can beat that Liberty team as well, now that they don't have Malik Willis. There's a little bit of a question mark with Liberty over there with who the new QB or how the new QB is going to perform. And then, I think 7 to 8 wins is about where I have Arkansas pegged, and 7 is their line. So like you were saying earlier with Alabama, Shoob, I think you have a little bit of that freedom. You have that insurance game if you're a bettor. So this may be a bet worth taking. All right, so next up, let's discuss LSU. This is one of the more interesting teams to talk about because they've had a little bit of a letdown here lately. They've got a new coaching hire in Kelly from Notre Dame. And, when you look at him on social media, he's had all these awkward interactions with recruits. There's been some questions over whether he's won over his locker room, whether the recruits truly respect him because of all these things that are going on. So there's some question marks in that respect, but let's forget all that. Let's look at the pure football roster here. Let's look at the holistic roster. Yes, they do have Brian Kelly in his first year at LSU, so there could be some growing pains with developing the new system there. Absolutely true, very possible. But when you look at LSU, they have an elite defensive line, an absolutely elite defensive line this year. So many NFL guys. Defensive end, Ali Gay. Defensive tackle, Jacqueline Roy. Defensive end, BJ Ojulari. And then they acquired Jarek Bernard-Converse, stud corner from Oklahoma State, through the transfer portal as well. Those 3 guys I mentioned from the defensive line are all guys who are projected to go in the first 90 picks. So that is absolutely insane. Not to mention they acquired Jaden Daniels, who will be thrown to Kayshon Boutte, who is a first-round talent. So when we think of all these factors, LSU's floor and ceiling is entirely determined on how well Jaden Daniels is going to play in that new system. If Jaden Daniels performs at a high level, this team can easily exceed that 7-win total, which is what I have them doing because of their defensive presence and that defensive line. We all know that line wins games. Defensive line and offensive line are probably arguably the most important positions that never really get talked about, that really win you games, dominating the trenches. And LSU has that. All they have to do is just get some decent QB play, and I think they'll be in a good situation despite it being year one for Brad Kelly.
I agree with that, especially your point about the offensive and defensive lines in college football in particular. That's really important, and the teams that have the most talent of those on those two sides of the trenches normally perform better. I will say though, so I actually agree with you on the win total here. I'm over on LSU, but I don't think the starting quarterback is going to be Jaden Daniels. I think it's going to be Miles Brennan. And that's just from what everything I've seen so far. But I think Miles Brennan, he had like a fluke arm injury where he was fishing or something like that last year. So he didn't play the whole season. But in 2020, if you look at his numbers, he was actually pretty good. And I think that either way, you got two good options with Brennan or Daniels. But I think that if Miles Brennan especially takes the job, I think this LSU team will surpass this win total. And I think Brian Kelly, despite all the offseason, shenanigans, I think he's going to do a good job. I think with Brian Kelly, he's a really good floor coach. And what I mean by that is, that his teams are going to be consistent. They're going to meet a minimum threshold every year. At Notre Dame, they won double digits every single year. And I think you're going to start seeing that at LSU. And I think he can elevate this team up and potentially win double-digit games this year. I don't think it'll be that high, but I think they can get over 7 wins. And I also agree with you about Kayshon Boutte. He was out for half the season last year. Now that they're going to have a full season of him, I think this team can only go up, if anything. So LSU over 7. And now Mississippi State. I'm going over 6.5 here. And I like this Mississippi State team a lot, actually. I think that they are sort of a sleeper team, in my opinion. And I think a lot of that has to do with Mike Leach. Mike Leach has a track record of consistently and slowly building his programs and elevating those win totals every year. And he's now at his 3rd season at Mississippi State. They returned the 14th most production in FBS. So that's certainly a plus for them. And I just really like what they have coming back. Quarterback Will Rogers returns. They have a lot of good pass catchers that are coming back. And the defense was quietly pretty decent last year. And I think they have a chance to be better this year. I think they're a sleeper team. The only pitfall that I see with this team maybe is their offensive line after using Charles Cross to the NFL. But I think Mississippi State, they're quietly hidden here in the SEC West. They were a good team last year. They just didn't have the record to show for it, and I think they hit this over.
So I'm with you on a lot of those things that you said, especially when you look at the defensive. When you look at their defense, all their projected starters are juniors, seniors, graduate transfers. Nothing but experience on the defensive side of the ball. So they are definitely going to be stout on defense. Not to mention, Will Rogers is definitely a well-respected player. 4,700 passing yards, 36 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. That's not too shabby now, is it? But when you look at their wide receiver production, there aren't any like true standouts. They're kind of just all over the place. There's no true standouts over there on the wide receiver side of the ball. I do like them for wins against Memphis, Arizona, Bowling Green, ETSU, maybe Auburn or Kentucky. But the thing is, in general, Mississippi State is a solid team, but I think they're going to lose a lot of close games. I don't think it's a lack of them being good versus bad, but the SEC is just so competitive. I think they will lose a lot of close games. And since they are more of a one-trick pony with their passing attack, it could come back to haunt them, especially if turnovers become an issue. But Will Rogers has been very good at limiting those turnovers. He's got a 4-to-1 ratio on TDs to INTs. So it just depends on how that whole thing works out. Now, like you said with the offensive line, if there is a step back in the offensive line, there's likely going to be a step back in the QB play. It's just how it goes, especially in the nature of college football. But they do have a very reliable defense to hold them over. But again, just the talent in the SEC West makes it so tough for them. And I am actually hammering them on the under. I think they will get 6 wins, but they are on 6.5. So it's very close, but I think they are a very solid team, but not quite for this line.
That's what happened to them last year. They lost a lot of close games. Now, lastly, Auburn sitting here at 6 even. Auburn was actually up at 6.5 a few days ago, and now it's dropped down to 6. So what you got here with Auburn?
Auburn's actually really interesting. When you look at their schedule, they have 8 home games. 8 home games. I don't know how they managed to do that. That is some amazing finesse right there. But I like them for 5 to 6 wins this year. So that puts me on the under. I like them for wins against Mercer, San Jose State, Missouri, WKU. And then maybe Arky, Ole Miss, Penn State, they could maybe steal one from some of those teams, but I don't think they'll win all three of those. Another thing for me that's about Auburn is it's TJ Finley or Zach Calzada. Two guys who have had very turbulent careers so far, very up and down. None of them really truly proven. None of them really considered elite quarterbacks. And then again, when you consider that you're in the SEC West playing some incredible talent around you, if you have very inconsistent QB play, it's going to be tough for you. Now, Auburn, of course, they do have a solid defense, but they don't have an elite defense. So if you are struggling offensively, your defense is eventually going to give in. They are led by that stud linebacker, Owen Popo, and he's an absolute beast. You got a good running back in Tank Bigsby. See what he can do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Auburn's another one of those teams where it's going to come down to their quarterback play. And ultimately, I don't think they're good enough overall, all around this season to be necessarily above that 6-win threshold unless one of those quarterbacks really surprises this year.
Absolutely. I am also hammering the under here for Auburn. And that's not even to mention the head coaching situation there with Brian Harsin. I mean, what a fiasco that's going on there. I feel like a lot of the projections don't really have that baked in here. I think the biggest problem here with Auburn and the biggest reason why I'm liking this under a lot is because Harsin's job is in major question here. And the boosters there, the people that are really pulling the strings there at Auburn, they don't want to see a lot of those guys don't want to see him there. And I think that Auburn could be a team that potentially just spirals out of control and quits midseason if they let go of Harsin. And I think that's a very real possibility. And that's one thing, especially in college football, especially in the SEC where the standards are so high, you'll see programs fire their coaches midseason and the teams just give up. You saw it happen to Florida last year. It happened to LSU last year as well. They just spiral out of control when they know the coach is going to be gone. And there's no reason to play the second half of the season as hard as you possibly can. I agree with you at quarterback, Finley or Calzada, whichever one, they're going to be a little bit of a notch down from Bo Nix. And another thing about Harsin that I didn't like is he made some questionable coordinator hires. Offensively, they hired Eric Kaisau. I don't know if I probably butchered his name badly. He was working under Harsin at Boise State. He does have a little bit of offensive coordinator experience there, but I feel like the offense was mediocre last year. I don't see it getting any better this year. And then defensively, they actually had a really good defense last year with Derek Mason as the defensive coordinator, but Derek Mason jumped ship and left. And I think Mason's a very good defensive coordinator. And Harsin promoted Jeff Schmedding, who was the linebacker coach there, who has no coordinator experience. So that's a very questionable hire there, a defensive coordinator. I could totally see a bit of regression here. And like I said, if Harsin gets fired midseason or there's just rumors swirling that he's going to be gone, I could see this Auburn team just completely spiraling out of control. I don't think they're going to make a bowl game. So I see this under as a good play just for the very likely possibility that this thing goes downhill this
Absolutely,
season.
Shoob. I 100% agree with you, and I do want to reiterate that Derek Mason point that you made. He jumped ship to Oklahoma State, who's considered maybe a lesser program in the standard of like a blue blood and money. And he also took less money to go to Oklahoma State. He's making less money over there. So that just speaks to the dysfunction that is existing in the Auburn, coaching staff. If you have your defensive coordinator who is performing at a high level, who just jumped ship to take less money at a school who you could typically probably poach from, it just speaks volumes about Auburn. And right now their football program is not in a good state.
And their schedule doesn't do them any favors. They're the only team in the country that has to play Alabama and Georgia every year. And this year they have to go at Alabama and at Georgia. That's just brutal. So I think Auburn under is a very solid play there. So
at least they have 8 home games.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that's going to matter, unfortunately, for them. So now that we've completed the SEC West, we are going to move on over to the East. I am going to move our little boxes here.